Good day and welcome to the IEEE Computer Society's presentation on BDR and compliance, finding a solution that helps you meet regulatory requirements by Fred Piquette. This webinar is proudly sponsored by Quorum. My name is Amir Drakis and I will be moderating today's presentation. At the end of our presentation, we will have time for questions. As questions occur to you, please type them into the box provided on the left and press the submit button. You do not need to wait until the end of the presentation. If you experience any audio or visual difficulties, please click on the help icon at the bottom of your screen. If you're not able to resolve the issue, please submit a comment by using the Q&A box. A representative will respond. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. Fred Piquette is a sales engineer at Quorum with a focus on demonstrating features and capabilities of Quorum's on-queue solution. He has over 10 years of experience in the IT industry, primarily focusing on information security, data protection, and data forensics. Previously, Fred was a principal systems engineer at Symantec. Prior to that, he closed out his law enforcement career doing data forensics investigations for the DC Metropolitan Police Department. Now I'd like to hand it over to Fred. Fred, take it away.
Thank you very much, Amir. So I'd just like to say again, welcome to everybody who's attending the webcast today, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone you happen to be dialing in from. So today we're going to talk a little bit about compliance. And compliance, frankly, really is the bane of most IT professionals' existence. My background, as Amir said, is primarily in data protection, data archival, and forensics. So I've seen some pretty interesting things that people in organizations have done from a compliance perspective, sometimes prior to an audit and sometimes, unfortunately, after an audit. I've seen a number of organizations that deliberately have chosen not to protect certain types of data. Exchange and SharePoint come to mind. And I've seen other organizations on the other side of the spectrum, a 10-plus year or unlimited retention policy for all of the information that they have internally. So both of these opposites are definitely compliance situations. We'll talk a little bit about them as we move forward into the meat and potatoes of the content today. And I appear to be having some difficulty advancing the slides for some reason. All right, so there are many flavors of compliance here in the United States, depending on what industry vertical or verticals any organization happens to do business in. And these things tell you essentially how IT needs to be governed by industry vertical. You could fall under any number of compliance categories. If you fall under FFIEC, which is the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, you might be under FRD, FDIC, it could be a credit union or other sort of banking entity. These are all wrapped up into one broad category of compliance. This can help in some ways because the criteria for compliance are going to be fairly uniform across. But it does nothing really to make life easier for the IT professional who has to ensure IT compliance with the mandates contained in those rules. Some other common ones out there, you've got HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, PCI DSS, which is Payment Card Industry, Data Security Standards. You have Sarbanes-Oxley or SOX, FERPA, GLBA, and that's really just kind of scratching the surface of the regulations out there. For basically every industry, there's going to be a flavor of compliance. So again, some organizations may be dipping their toes into different industry verticals, so they might need to comply with more than simply one of these. But in any case, the rules for these industries or the regulations have typically been written by career bureaucrats with the assistance of attorneys, accountants, and pretty much everybody but the folks who actually work in IT. And these rules, despite very little IT input, are put together to tell IT professionals how IT has to be governed. So really, how do we get from what the compliance regulations say to what actually needs to be done? And that's really the goal of today's session. What I think you're going to find as we continue on here is while there are some differences among the various regulations out there, there are also a lot of similarities. All right, so we'll start out with FFIEC requirements, and these pertain to financial institutions. And frankly, this gem is taken right out of their site and the handbook that they publish. And what it says is that financial institutions should make formal arrangements for alternate processing capability in the event that their data processing site becomes inoperable or inaccessible. Right? Now, what's most interesting, or frustrating as the case may be, really is that nowhere in that document is there any listed hard standard as to what recovery time objective or recovery point objective should be for systems and technology in an IT environment. Financial institutions are very heavily regulated. They do have tremendous compliance requirements encoded in the regulations, and this can make things difficult for IT professionals. Frankly, we tend to be very binary, for lack of a better descriptive term. We understand rules, we understand technology. Most of us know coding to a greater or lesser degree. We've got the ability to write scripts. We know if-then statements. We know how to set proper rules. Passwords need to be above a certain complexity threshold, so on and so forth. So these things all make sense to us because they're coded, or at least organized, in the manner in which most of us think. But when you get to something as ethereal as what FFIEC has published, it's going to make it difficult, really, to distill the necessary requirements from the published rule. We'll cover a couple more examples, but the end goal is to really get to where they are, or why they are the way they are, and how to develop a methodology that allows you to build requirements from the applicable rules and the regulations. All right, so this next slide here really talks about terminology around alternative data centers as related to FFIEC rules and what that terminology means. A hot site is this, a duplicate site is that, cold site is something else, and a warm site is somewhere in between. This gets you a bit closer, really, but in no way helps you with how to develop a recovery time objective necessary to comply with the rule. Should I have a duplicate data center, active-active, when I could have a cold one or a hot site with active and backup? Which one is really going to be the right one to do to meet my needs? Which one do I need to propose to leadership or managing partner or whoever runs an organization? Basically, how do I make sure that we can get from point A to point B to comply with the regulations out there? And so what we want to do here, really, is to figure out how do we make that leap from the word of law to actual practical ways of conforming with these regulations and doing things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about HIPAA requirements as well, and I'm really touching on the larger ones that tend to have effect across multiple swaths of industry here. But here's the actual HIPAA requirement. I'm not going to waste folks' time on the phone today by reading it to you because it's long and frankly it's full of legalese and quite dull to kind of browse through. But this is directly from HIPAA rules around contingency planning. Now, what it says is that you must have a backup. It also says you must have a recovery plan. You have to have emergency modes of operation, and you have to have testing and revision procedures in place. And finally, you have to have your applications and data critically analyzed. Right? I mean, that all sounds great, but really, again, how do you get from point A to point B? What you have to do is actually meet with all of the involved business units, ask them to detail their requirements for systems and data. They really have to tell IT how it's supposed to function rather than the other way around. In IT, we love to set the rules. For example, we might want to be able to recover a certain system or application in an 8-hour window. Well, that might not be acceptable to the specific business units. From a compliance perspective, they may need instant or near instant recovery of whatever systems or applications they happen to be using within their silo. And when it comes down to HIPAA, I mean, I've met some folks who work in healthcare who think that, for example, an accounting department might need to be back up within a week. They have to be able to run payroll. I've met others in the same industry who actually process a lot of their own patient financial transactions as well, who think accounting has to be up within 24 hours in order to process orders and services. Right? So again, how do we get from A to B? And really what it comes down to is each company is going to have to set those policies and whatever real requirements they happen to have. The real rules that you have are going to be how to follow those policies you've set, how to analyze them, make sure they fit for the industry you're in, the company you're in, the business that you do. And then having a way to test those policies, review those policies, and finally enact those policies becomes the critical path. So moving right along here. Let's talk about SOX requirements for a moment. And frankly, I probably should have put these first as opposed to third because they do apply probably to the broadest swath of business and industry in the United States. But let's talk about SOX for a moment and really how it came to be. You're going to find if you read all, or if you decide to download a copy of Sarbanes-Oxley and read through all of it, there are absolutely no requirements for system recovery in SOX. There's nothing in the SOX legal language that requires a recovery or business continuity plan. The teeth that Sarbanes-Oxley does have, though, is due to major corporate and accounting scandals from companies such as your Enrons and your WorldComs. And basically what it does is hold management liable, personally liable for any exposure, as well as for the accuracy and completeness of any financial or corporate reports. It also adds on other provisions for records retention to support investigations of exposure or financial irregularities. For example, if during the course of an audit on the accuracy of a financial report that a company's kicked out there, certain emails or other electronic records are needed in order to complete that audit. If you do not protect those systems or have a contingency plan or process in place to go ahead and retain potentially auditable or discoverable records, senior management can and will be held responsible. And these rules apply mostly to publicly traded companies. And frankly, this is what drives SOX to the top of most compliance concerns. When Enron did their business in 2002, this is what got folks sent to the federal prison system. It was malicious destruction of the relevant records and publication of improper financial statements. In some of the cases, there actually were internal policies in place for some of the data from a retention perspective, but those policies simply were not being followed. So in SOX, again, there's no provision for a recovery plan, just that you must have financial reporting and data retention policies in place that you will follow. From the perspective of the IT professional, you could potentially be held responsible for violations here. This is something that that absolutely could happen and has happened in the past. Are you potentially responsible? Yes. Is your boss potentially responsible? Yes, they potentially are. And kind of moving along that line, another example. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina rolled through the Gulf Coast and pretty much flooded something like 80% of New Orleans proper. I personally remember how bad that was. At the time, I was still in law enforcement. I was part of a group of about 250 officers from the department I worked for that were bussed down to New Orleans to help restore order, because I believe it was something like 60% of the New Orleans Police Department looked after their families instead of reporting for their jobs. Getting back on track, before the floods got out of hand, one of the things that the city elected to do was back up data on its housing computers, and that's all of the information on who owns what, which was in a single database, really, that was backed up to the cloud with about a 30-day retention on it. And that was their policy. Well, the floods came in, they wiped out production systems, and it took well in excess of 30 days to go ahead and rebuild the production facilities. So the data in the cloud was expired and no longer available by the time they got the systems back up and running. Right? That's definitely a bit of a problem. So what they did is they repurposed the system. They found an old, I believe it was a 4-year-old tape to restore from, and found they didn't have all the data they needed. Fortunately, there were a lot of paper records that they were able to access, and the city started an effort on data entry in order to repopulate their systems. Well, during this process, the city had a lot of lawsuits filed against it because all of the mortgage and ownership information was missing or out of date. Folks that wanted to do things like buy and sell houses couldn't do so. People who'd been arrested couldn't post bail because ownership information of assets to use as collateral simply wasn't there. Right? So the city ultimately had to hire 42 data entry specialists for a period of a little bit in excess of 6 weeks to get all of that data back in. And that cost the city upwards of about $4 million. At the end of the day, because of all the irregularities, an audit was performed. And some on the city's IT staff were held personally accountable because their policies were insufficient to retain information that was required to be held as discoverable or auditable as part of that audit that was performed. So yes, IT personnel were held personally liable for loss of that data. The language in SOX, in my personal opinion, is very vague, yet SOX is serious business. As it stands right now, it happens to have just about the longest arm legally, even more so than FDIC rules and audits in many cases. So again, this is pretty serious business. If you're going to make sure you're crafting policies to make sure that you and your organization are protected, you need to make sure that you are taking due diligence in the development of those policies so you don't fall afoul of applicable regulations. From where I'm going here, you might be guessing that I'm building to a central theme here. So what are these requirements, and really, how do we go about meeting them? Well, it comes down to these 5 things, and different regulations, depending on how they've been written, they might state these things differently. They might break them down into more or less steps, but really it's going to be the same 5 pieces. And what you need to begin with is an impact analysis. Potential causes and effects of losing the IT systems and technology in your environment. If a print server goes down, it's probably not going to have as much of an impact on your business as if your Exchange server were to go down. So this needs to be done not by IT alone, but as part really of a wider business continuity planning process, where all of the business units that have a stake in the use of that system or application, all in the same room, come to a decision about what those requirements happen to be. Now, once you've performed your impact analysis, you move on to the next step, and that's going to be your risk assessment. You need to understand what happens organization-wide if there is an outage, and then you work your way backwards. You go from the application level, then to the server level, and then to the network level. So you know if there happens to be a failure, you know all of the impacts that are going to cascade out underneath the tree and what the ramifications of each are. That's how you go about planning your risk assessment. You have a risk assessment done, and you pretty much know what the risk to the business is should you experience an outage, whether it's a minor outage or something due to a disaster. So then you're going to manage that risk assessment and start setting up your policies about how you're going to handle any of the risks and potential consequences that you've laid out. Right? So from there, you monitor. And as time goes by, things are definitely going to change. If there's anyone in this session who, afterwards can go ahead in the Q&A box, let me know honestly that they have the same network configuration in their environment that they did 7 years ago, I'll be pleasantly surprised. Frankly, with the rate of advancement in technology, there are going to be changes in an environment over the time of those advancements. And frankly, those changes will have their own ramifications on your development of a strategy. Right? So, how do those changes change how you recover data or systems? If you have a database server locally that you've moved up to the cloud, that's going to require a change in recovery strategy. So it's not just about recovering the data, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but it's also about the security of the data, the availability of the data. These all become critical aspects of the monitor phase. And then the next phase, and final phase here, as much as you can say anything is final in this process because it is a continuing process, that last phase is going to be the testing phase. And if there is one nugget of wisdom I can pass along here, is that you cannot test too much. I've worked with customers who test on a yearly basis. Excuse me, some of them will test a couple times a year. Some of them go even longer between their tests than a year, 2 years or more, as it fits their business needs as they see them. However, the longer you go between a test, the more you're going to be affected by infrastructure and other changes that were put in place since the last test. This is typically, from what I've seen in my experience, results in a higher percentage of failed tests. So you cannot test enough. We'll talk a little bit about this more later on. So across all the different compliance regulations, essentially they're saying the same 5 things. This is a process that needs to be done on an application-by-application basis, a server-by-server basis, and a situation-by-situation basis. None of the regulations here, none of the rules or laws are really going to provide you with hard numbers you need to adhere to for recovery. You really need to decide for yourself what those numbers are. So how do you figure what those numbers are? Again, the laws don't really dictate those numbers. For regulated industries that fall under HIPAA, FDIC, etc., there could be definite numbers. Right? The laws don't tell you what those numbers should be, so how do you determine what those numbers should be? Well, frankly, you go through an audit process. And that might be a painful way of saying it, but what you do is you go through the audit process, because the auditors are going to hundreds of hospitals or financial institutions, excuse me, or even educational institutions, depending on what industry vertical they happen to play in, and they're developing their audit criteria from what everybody else is doing. So when they see a new technology hot on the market, they say, hey, with this technology, you could recover in a day or a few hours, as opposed to a process that's taking 3 days or a week. And essentially that ends up becoming the new baseline after that technology has become validated. So the auditors come in, they might say something like, hey, we noticed that you have a 3-day recovery time from tape. You might want to consider upgrading for a faster recovery time. A year might go by, you go through a secondary audit or a second audit, or it could be a third or fourth. They might come back that following year and say, hey, tape's no longer good enough. You have to have a faster method of recovery. And this is how these compliance regulations work. Standards are typically developed by the auditors performing the audits, instead of through the word of law as it's presented. So what needs to be done is really to get over the stage fright of having an initial audit done. If you're regularly testing your recovery strategy, then frankly you have a higher chance of successfully navigating your audit. So auditors have key words that they look for. They look for reasonable. They look for timely. They look for in the best interests of their customers, which is my personal favorite. And they also look for responsible. And because these needs change, the requirements change over time despite the law being static. Now, this is interesting because when you look at FDIC audits, which now roll up under FFIEC, they originally came about from accountants. Believe it or not, it was accountants who went to leadership at banks and said, hey, you need a way to do this. No IT person was ever mentioned in an FDIC audit until data started residing on computer systems. So understanding things like in the best interest of the customer start to become important. It's an ever-moving target, and frankly, the technology for recovery has become different over time. Over the last 3 years, regulated companies using tape have been getting dinged and being told, hey, you need something with a faster recovery time objective. So you must be faster, you must be more prompt, and frankly more expedient in the way that you recover your systems. Okay, so moving right along here. So what do you do? For recovery, there are a lot of things that you can do. You could do what the FFIEC recommends and have 2 hot sites. Your primary site might have, say, 10 servers, and a secondary site with 10 servers, and you could do live replication. Frankly, that's probably likely the most expensive solution you're going to find out there on the market for business continuity purposes. For every server and application you install, you're basically going to be doubling down that investments to go ahead and implement a solution like that. Your big banks can do it, your Wells Fargo, your Bank of America. There are other companies out there that do it as well. CoreLogic and others come to mind. They all have that kind of solution. They're constantly replicating their data, so they have the availability that they think they need. Amazon tries to do it. They did have a major outage in the not-too-distant past, but they do a respectable job. So it's important to follow the wheel and do the 5 things and do it often. If you deploy a new system or application, you should probably have a step in that deployment process to go ahead and perform an impact analysis and integrate it into the wider strategy that you develop. Take that system or application to the business units and ask them, hey, what's the impact of an outage going to be? How long can this be down for you to meet your business needs, as well as how that application is used? On the IT side, we kind of live in our own world or bubble. We understand it might take several hours or a couple of days to rebuild a server or rebuild a system. Frankly, the CEO may not. One constant I've run into in talking with other IT professionals is that what IT can deliver and what the business unit in question needs is always going to have a bit of a gap or a delta. Things are going to be different. So overcoming that gap and figuring out how you solve those compliance needs, really that's how you find out what the new acceptable is. And really, this is going to come down in some ways to cost. As the needle moves, IT budgets have to expand, frankly, to meet the new needs. An example that isn't grounded in recovery might be that now having your company website work on your mobile phones is pretty much a must-have. A decade ago, it was primarily an afterthought. The difference is, these days, pretty much everybody has a mobile device of some sort that they live their lives on. The proliferation of mobile devices has really gone through the roof in that time. Everybody lives off their mobile phone or tablet these days. So not having a mobile website is really going to reduce the number of site visits you get. Looking more into something along the recovery perspective, what you want to be able to do is deliver a solution that can be deployed anywhere, but still make cost decisions that leave you better equipped. We talk about tape solutions. It's a familiar media. It's a low-cost media. So if I'm going to put in a better solution, or one that can instantly recover, for example, or near instantly recover, it really, in order to be widely implemented, it needs to bend the cost curve down to something approaching the level of tape costs, as budget's likely going to preclude for most businesses out there the fully replicated data center. And frankly, that's where OnQ comes in. And we'll talk a little bit about how the OnQ solution works as we go through this. We'll talk about how Quorum helps solve compliance needs for customers, dig into solution details. If you have any questions as we go through this, please, or anything else I've covered, be happy to put in the chat window, and I can address those once we finish up here. So what we do at Quorum, we have an application called OnQ. What we do is we take your server base. We realize that not everybody's going to be 100% virtual now or even in the future. So whether it's a physical server, a virtual server, VMware, Hyper-V, Zen, Parallels, or KVM, they all have their platforms. And what we've done is develop that OnQ solution that is really agnostic to all of these platforms, whether physical or virtual. We come in, said we can plug in everywhere because we know your environment will change over time. And just as an example, as VMware prices have gone up over the recent past and Hyper-V's come down, I've had a fair number of customers who've asked me how we can assist them in making that move. Well, we absolutely can. We have tools and technology to do that. And we're already your backup provider, so yes, we can definitely help you make that switch. Things will still be the same because despite the platform change, it's still the same server to us. Right? And so how do we do it? Well, for Windows systems, we leverage Windows technology to back those systems up. And we also back up any Linux systems that have a Red Hat kernel. We can protect those systems as frequently as every 15 minutes. As part of the backup process goes, we deduplicate on the server. We're protecting as well as across all systems on the appliance that is local. So anyway, we back the data up on your local appliance, and you can use that for all of your file level recovery needs, mail recovery, all those things are absolutely baked into the solution. We then take that data and we create a virtual machine inside of our appliance so that if you do happen to have an outage of some sort, your recovery time objective, that pesky thing we've been hammering on about today, is really the amount of time it takes to boot that virtual machine. So it's no longer now a matter of trying to recover that server, finding the tapes, switching to a whole new data center. It's simply a matter of booting the replica server to keep things going. So we then take that data we've backed up and deduplicated, we go ahead and compress it and encrypt it, and then replicate it to either one of our cloud data centers or to a second appliance at a site of your choosing. Our cloud data centers are PCI compliant, we're audited yearly, we're HIPAA compliant as well, and all of our data centers are SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We go through the same process at the replication target. We hold the data, we create the virtual replicas of your production systems. So in the event that you need to fail over to those replicas, should a catastrophic occurrence happen, you've got those securely off-site. With a little DNS redirection, your business continues to run. Now, because we've built the virtual replicas of all the servers you have, you can use our sandbox to do all of your DR testing. So you can have DR tests when needed, so your users can test processes and procedures for using the virtual replicas without impacting your production site or production systems. So that really takes that frequent testing and turns it from what used to be an all-hands event that might take a weekend or frankly several weekends to complete, and you now have it all at your fingertips and can conduct those tests without having to impact your production environment. You boot the servers, you have the users connect, you have them do their tests, disconnect, and at that point they're pretty much done. Now, the on-queue, which is our recovery application, was designed to hold about 30 to 40 days of data. Since we are having a discussion about compliance, there's many reasons that you might want to hold that data for more extended periods. So we have an archive vault unit that connects to the on-queue and stores that data longer term. So you still have all of the resources to hold the data for whatever extended period your organization feels is going to be needed to meet retention requirements. We can do this on-site and off-site as well, and we also include a set of migration tools to assist with infrastructure migrations, whether you're going from physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, or virtual to physical. We can support all of those environmental changes. And this is a diagram of how we work. We take your physical machine data, your virtual machine data, as well as data from SANs and NASs, and we back it up to the local appliance. We then go ahead and replicate that data, either up to the on-queue cloud or an appliance at a remote site, or both if desired, whatever happens to meet your business requirements. We then allow you to recover to virtual replicas of your physical or virtual production systems wherever that backup data happens to reside. So this really gives you near instantaneous recovery capabilities at any location where we happen to house the data for you. Moving right along here, we do have a new version of the technology that we've recently released. It's an improvement over what we've already been able to do. We wanted to integrate new software and hardware capabilities in just to make sure that we're keeping up with the times, so you can keep up with potentially new interpretations of regulatory requirements as they get developed by auditors. And what we found is that while the hypervisor on the appliance is fantastic at virtualizing things, we found that it does get in the way of some common tasks. Networking would be one notable example. While the processors in most modern systems these days are very fast and very efficient, they weren't really designed for handling network traffic. It's not really a core function of what they are purposed for. So letting the network card handle something like that is far more efficient. So we use technology like Intel's SRIOV to pass through the PCI bus to the virtual machine replicas that we have on the appliance to make sure that network traffic is not going to have to traverse the hypervisor layer and slow things down. We've added 10 gig networking to all of our appliances. We pass through the connection of the virtual replicas to the network cards just to make everything faster. Now you might notice some terminology on this slide that's a little unfamiliar. On-queue, that's simply our data protection and system recovery application. RN is going to stand for recovery node. It's the virtual replica of your physical or virtual machine that we build from the backup data we get. The appliance has an embedded virtual SAN that basically stores all of the backup data. It's where that data resides and is managed. And we've also added a 400 gig NVMe card to our appliances. And For those folks out there that might not be up to date on what NVMe is, it's basically a technology that was pioneered by Fusion.io a few years ago. And really what it does is it puts the disk, instead of having to pass through a SAS or maybe a SATA controller, it's going to let the disk talk directly through the PCI bus to give flash speed to whatever happens to be using it. So it's basically a gigantic level 2 cache that gives us the ability to move data as fast as we can possibly move it. So when we back up your data, it's going to flow seamlessly from the NVMe cache to the virtual SAN to the spinning disks and back up that stack should you need to invoke the recovery node. And lastly, I guess all of our data is compressed, encrypted in flight and at rest. Again, we're PCI compliant. We've gone through the audit process repeatedly, so we know what you're going to face there. We have sort of done a preemptive strike for our customer base for applicable industry regulations. And so this is our appliance range. We do scale from very small to very large. We can have anywhere from 5 to 50 terabytes of storage in a 2U appliance. If you have greater storage needs, we can scale those appliances out as needed. And we also on the top end have the OnQ pod. The pod allows us really to independently scale out things like compute, memory, and storage resources independently of each other for our larger enterprise-sized customers. For those large vary environments, it simply becomes a whole heck of a lot cheaper than putting in multiple 2U appliances. So we can scale anywhere from 5 to 400 terabytes of storage. We can scale up compute and memory either by migrating to a larger series appliance for compute capability. Memory's inexpensive, widely available, so we can always upgrade those. But we start with 4 cores in the 404 series appliances, and we cap out at 24 cores on the 424 series appliances. With variable memory, the defaults are set there, 64 gigs on the low end, by default 256 gigs on the high end, with the ability to pretty dramatically expand those out to meet customer need. So the pod, for those folks who may be part of larger enterprises who are wondering, really it integrates in multiple blades and disk shelves. That way we can scale out in any direction you need. We do also offer 24/7 support. I don't know why that 4x24 is up there. It should read 7x24. And we have all of the networking options to support your environment on these appliances that you could possibly need. And we're running up close to the end of the presentation here. This is our new user interface. You can see that this is organized as a heat map, which is a very nice thing to have. Each server you're protecting has a tile. And if a server has a problem, we're automatically going to migrate those tiles to the top, just so you know what's going on. So you can easily see any problems you're having wherever OnQ happens to be deployed at. One other nice thing here is that you can go ahead in the lower right-hand part of that slide, you can go ahead and tag your systems. And this is typically done either by by functional unit or department units. And what we can do with those tags is allow you to do things like set dependencies or boot orders for the systems that have those tags. For example, and this is fairly rudimentary, but I can go ahead and tag my Exchange server and my domain controller so that they're in the same group. I can then go ahead and set a dependency so that if I boot the recovery node, that virtual replica of my Exchange server, I can do a check to make sure the domain controller is running. If, for example, that we find the domain controller is not running, we can go ahead and set a policy to boot the recovery node for the domain controller prior to booting the recovery node for the Exchange server. Because not having your domain controller up when running Exchange is pretty much like trying to fly a plane without wings. You're not going to get all that far. And frankly, that is the bulk of what I plan to cover today. I finished up in a little bit quicker than I had originally planned, so it opens up a little bit more time for Q&A. But just know, we are a recovery solution. We are a compliance solution across the board, and we really approach the cost of where a tape solution or a new tape solution would currently be. So what OnQ is really about giving you the benefits of new technology while maintaining the flexibility to support any environment you might have. And I'd just like to say thank you for the time today. And Amir, I think we're about ready to jump into the Q&A portion.
All right, thanks for that. Fred, so let me look into our Q&A and see what we have here. Our first question would be, where are Quorum's data centers located?
Okay, that's actually a question I get asked quite a bit. That we do have 3 data centers that we currently leverage. One of those data centers is in San Jose, California. We have another in Secaucus, New Jersey, and a third data center in the UK. Now, if you're based in the US, all of your data is going to remain in the US and vice versa for the UK. We don't cross country lines unless a customer specifically requests us to do so.
Okay, and looking, we have a second question, which would be, do you have any compliance credentials?
Yes, we do. I think that question might have come up a little bit before I hit it on the WebEx portion. Yes, we can produce these on request. We're credentialed for PCI. We're HIPAA compliant as well. What else did I want to touch on there? For some of these regulations out there, knowing your really or what that vendor happens to be doing with your information is just as important internally as what you're doing internally, because the compliance rules actually affect those third parties as well. Let's see here. Alrighty.
All right. Well, Fred, see, we have a couple more for you.
Okay.
Let's see. One being, what is your typical RTO?
Okay, so that's actually another good question. So, our recovery time objective, the amount of time that it takes in order to have systems back up and running, and IT systems and applications, the way they're supposed to be for business use, is typically measured in just a few minutes. The typical boot time for a recovery node in the 3.x technology was right around the 4 to 5 minute mark. With some of the hardware and software improvements we've made in the 4.0 series technology, we've seen that come down a little bit, to usually anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes, depending on there are a number of variables of the system, number of drives that have to be spun up and mounted, number of processes that are included as part of the boot cycle, things of that nature. But it tends to be measured in just a few minutes.
All right, let's see, Fred, we have a couple more that just popped up for us.
Okay.
One of them being, excuse me, do you do data mining and data analytics?
Okay, so that is one thing that we do not do currently. There are some potential analytic functions that we're looking to integrate into a future offering of the solution. Frankly, if that's a discussion you'd like to have, recommend going ahead and reaching out via our website. Those futures are definitely something we can discuss via a roadmap discussion. Right.
Oh, okay. Well, Fred, looking at this, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to send them in. I don't. Oh, there we go. We have one more. Let's see if I can phrase this correctly. If I would like to discontinue your service, then how long will the company data be stored in your system?
Okay, that's actually a pretty common question that we do get. So we have a process for removing data on locally stored appliances that is fairly straightforward. When we unenroll a system from that appliance, essentially what we do is we remove all of the metadata associated with the file system data that we've stored in the repository. So Basically, what we're going to go ahead and do is use a Linux RM function to remove all that data so it will not be in a recoverable state. Now, we do have a similar process in place for data that happens to be stored on our cloud infrastructure, with a couple additional steps there and overwriting to make sure that that data is simply not recoverable. But yes, we do have procedures in place for that. Generally, that data removal process is done as soon as is realistically possible, generally just a few days for that to be done.
All right, Fred, next question is, are there any particular Linux flavor required?
Oh, yeah, so I think they're referring to Linux versions. So from a data protection perspective and recovery node creation perspective, as it stands right now, we support any Linux OS that has a Red Hat kernel. So your Red Hat, your CentOS, your Oracle Enterprise Linux. I know that we are looking at potentially increasing that supportability downstream. I don't know exactly where that happens to be on the roadmap right now, but as of things right now, we support anything with a Red Hat kernel.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions up here, Fred. Do you?
I do see one that kind of popped in. Here, stating they're looking to use Salesforce to enter mental health notes and keep them under compliance with HIPAA requirements. When you're using Salesforce, this may have been a question asked prior. I don't really understand kind of where the questions go, or what exactly the question is there. I guess I'd hazard to take a guess that they're asking whether or not storing information in Salesforce would meet HIPAA requirements. Really what I think that comes down to is finding out from Salesforce what their policies and procedures are for data retention. Not only data retention, but I mean for data retention. Salesforce itself isn't necessarily going to provide a method of business continuity. It's more of a database or data warehousing functionality with analytics and reporting features built in. But from a compliance perspective, especially around things like Sarbanes-Oxley, where you do have to keep potentially auditable or discoverable information, if you're using Salesforce to do that, I would definitely recommend getting from the folks at Salesforce any certifications they have along those lines, because again, third parties that are utilized by a business for a service or otherwise, for most regulations out there, are going to be held equally as accountable as the business they're supporting.
All right. Well, it looks like we have run out of time. I'd like to thank Fred. Thank you very much for this informative presentation. A special thanks to our audience for taking the time to attend and to participate. And thank you to Quorum.
Y'all have a great day.